Faceless, silent, and armed with weapons built not to attack, but to hold a line, the Jedi Temple Guard stood at the center of the most powerful religious order in the galaxy, and no one, not the High Council, not the Chancellor, not even Yoda himself, ever truly watched them back. That absence of oversight was not an accident or a gap that had been overlooked. It was the design deliberately built into the role from the beginning, and the Order believed in it completely. The Jedi built the Temple Guard to be incorruptible by stripping away every personal variable that could compromise a Jedi's loyalty. Names, rank, history, ambition, and personal connection were all removed from the role by design, and what remained was something the Order could trust without reservation or review. The Order had created the perfect enforcers, and in doing so, it had created the one group inside its ranks that no one ever had a reason to question. But pride in a system is not the same thing as understanding it, and the Order had never once questioned whether its most trusted creation was also its most dangerous flaw. Upon examining the Canon Sources, we've uncovered the dark truth about them. Chapter 1. The Faceless Order. Every Jedi in the Order had a path that was traceable, personal, and built on a series of relationships that defined who they were within the ranks. Younglings trained together in groups, then bonded with a single master who shaped their development directly. Knights eventually took on students of their own, and even the members of the High Council were known figures, identifiable by name, rank, and the lineage of training that had produced them. The Order ran on that web of known individuals, and personal accountability was woven into every layer of how it functioned. The Temple Guards had none of that, and by design, they were never meant to. They wore masks that hid their faces completely, carried weapons designed to hold a position rather than pursue a target, and operated inside the temple as interchangeable figures rather than individuals. No guard ever introduced themselves, and no guard's personal history had any bearing on how they performed the role. One looked and functioned identically to the next, and that uniformity was not a side effect of the job, but the entire point of it. But everything changed when you examine what that uniformity actually required, and what it quietly took away. The Order built the Guard on a principle that seemed, from inside the ranks, like obvious good sense. Identity creates pressure points, because a guard who could be recognized could be approached, a guard who carried personal history could be swayed by it, and a guard with ambitions or relationships that mattered to them could be compromised through those things. And a compromised guard was worse than no guard at all, because a compromised guard had access to everything worth protecting. So the Order removed every variable it could identify, deliberately and completely, and trusted that what remained was a group that could not be corrupted by the forces that compromised everyone else. As depicted in the Clone Wars, the Temple Guard served as protectors of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, covering physical security, access control, and internal rule enforcement. They guarded restricted areas, blocked entry to spaces the wider Order was not authorized to enter, and handled any situation inside the temple that required force. When a Jedi needed to be detained or supervised, the guards were the ones who carried out that function without any acknowledgement of who the Jedi in question was or what their record meant. The Order did not select these Jedi for raw power or combat ability. The role required something rarer and more difficult to cultivate: the ability to enforce rules against colleagues without hesitation, to stand in front of someone they had trained beside or respected for years, and hold the line regardless of that history. The series shows their weapon reflected this purpose precisely: a double-bladed pike with a yellow blade, built for holding position rather than winning a fight, the weapon of a system rather than a person. The guards were exactly that, a system wearing Jedi robes, serving the Order so completely that they had ceased, in any meaningful sense, to serve themselves. The Order looked at that and saw strength. What it didn't realize was that it had built something far more dangerous than a security force. It had built a group that was incapable of asking whether the system it protected was already broken. Chapter 2. Trusted without question. Because the guards had no personal agenda with the Order trusted them more completely than it trusted almost anyone else. That trust was earned through a logic that was difficult to argue with. They could not be pressured through loyalty to a colleague because the role had removed those loyalties. They could not be swayed by Jedi's reputation or record because the role had made reputation irrelevant to how they functioned. They had no career advancement to protect, and no alliances that could compromise their decisions, which meant the internal politics that shaped every other relationship inside the Order had no hold on them whatsoever. The detention of Ahsoka Tano in the Season 5 arc of the Clone Wars is the clearest demonstration of how completely this worked. Ahsoka was a respected Jedi with years of documented service, a former Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, and a Jedi whose record within the Order was well established. She was captured and held under Jedi authority, with Temple Guards involved in her custody, and throughout that process, there was no visible acknowledgement of who she was or what her history meant, because the order they had received was the only thing that mattered, and the identity of the person receiving it was entirely beside the point. The system functioned exactly as it had been designed to function, and no one watching it had any reason to object. Yet what no one realized was that a system functioning perfectly is a system no one examines, and that is exactly where the danger was buried. Every organization that intends to survive builds oversight into every layer of its structure, because trusted individuals can still be wrong, and because the more trusted a group is, the more damage it can cause when its blind spots go unexamined. Superiors review subordinates, external bodies audit internal ones, and checks exist at each level precisely because good design and good intentions are not the same thing as good outcomes, and the gap between them is where things fall apart. The Jedi Order built the Temple Guard to watch everyone inside its ranks, and then built nothing to watch the Guard on the assumption that the Guard's design had made that unnecessary. They had removed everything that makes an individual corruptible, which meant there was nothing left to check, and that reasoning is sound only if the threat the Order faces is internal corruption carried out by individuals with no personal motives. It is not sufficient if the threat moves through entirely different channels and has no need to corrupt anyone at all. The Guards were trusted absolutely, and that absolute trust was the opening Sidious had been waiting for. Chapter 3. Inside Everything. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was not simply a headquarters in an administrative sense, but the operational center of everything the Order did and everything it was. As shown across the Clone Wars series, it was where younglings were shaped into Jedi from their earliest years, where the High Council made decisions that affected worlds and governments across the galaxy, and where centuries of accumulated knowledge were stored, protected, and consulted. Every choice that mattered to the Jedi Order passed through that building, and the people who understood it most completely were not its senior members, but its guards. Rather than being stationed at the temple's edges, the guards were inside its most critical spaces, present at internal hearings, near the archives, and moving through corridors that the wider order did not have clearance to enter, which meant their contact with the temple's inner workings was more direct and more constant than almost anyone else, including most council members who spent the majority of the Clone Wars commanding armies, conducting diplomacy, and managing a conflict that pulled them outward and away from the daily interior life of the Order, which meant the people who knew the most about how the Order functioned were not the ones leading it, but the ones no one could identify by name. Still, everything changed when you consider what that access actually meant in the hands of someone willing to use it against the Order itself. A general leading clone troops in the Outer Rim understood the Order through the reports that reached them. A diplomat operating in the Senate understood it through official communications and formal channels. The guards understood it directly and daily, the actual state of things as they functioned, unfiltered by distance or delay, seeing what the records showed and what they did not. They were present in restricted rooms before decisions were formalized, and after the formal accounts were written, they had the most complete picture of the Order's interior that anyone inside the temple possessed, and they had it precisely because their role demanded it, and because no one questioned them, no one ever asked what they were doing with it. That access was not incidental, but the very mechanism through which the Order monitored itself, with the guards serving as the means by which the mechanism operated. But the Order had built its watch without ever asking what the watch was blind to. And that question, the one that should have been asked first, was never asked at all. The Order had handed total trust to a group with no mechanism to question whether that trust was deserved, and it had done so deliberately, proudly, and as though the absence of doubt were the same thing as safety, which is a strange kind of danger precisely because it looks exactly like strength right up until the moment it does not. The people with the deepest access to the Order's interior had no one asking what they might be missing, and the Order never thought to ask because it had already decided the answer was nothing. Chapter 4. What They Missed. The Clone Wars did not create the structural problems inside the Jedi Order decades before a single shot was fired. However, the war found every crack that already existed and applied pressure to all of them at once. As shown across the Clone Wars series and Revenge of the Sith, the Jedi shifted from peacekeepers into military commanders almost overnight, with masters and knights leading armies across the galaxy and Padawans going to active conflict zones before their training was complete. The careful internal governance the temple had developed over centuries collapsed under the weight of managing a war on multiple fronts, and the Order kept running on momentum and prior assumptions rather than the kind of attention that would have revealed what it was no longer able to see. At the same time, the Order knew the Sith had returned. The apparent death of Darth Maul on Naboo, shown in the Phantom Menace, had confirmed that a Sith was operating in the galaxy, and the Rule of Two, which limits the Sith to one master and one apprentice at any time, meant a second Sith was still out there, unidentified, and the Jedi had been searching for that identity since Naboo without success, running that search alongside every other crisis they were managing. What they didn't realize was that the answer had been sitting across the table from them at every briefing, in every war council, for over a decade. As revealed in Revenge of the Sith, Darth Sidious had been Palpatine the entire time, the Chancellor of the Republic, the man the Jedi briefed regularly, fought a war to protect, and trusted completely. He had engineered the Clone Wars from both sides, designing the conflict to pull the Jedi outward and away from the kind of attention that might have found him. And every briefing the Order gave him told him precisely how close they were to identifying what they were looking for. The Clone Wars shows that the Jedi Council openly acknowledged their ability to sense the Force had weakened, that the dark side had grown strong enough to cloud their perception in ways they could recognize, but not reverse. Their primary tool for detecting deception and identifying nearby threats had become unreliable at exactly the moment Sidious was in closest proximity to them. Every meeting with Palpatine, every council session, every briefing conducted near the seat of Republic power was happening inside a cloud they could not see through. They were reporting their progress to the very man they were hunting, and the Force, the one thing that should have warned them, had gone quiet exactly when they needed it most. None of this was something the Guard could have addressed, because their watch ran inside the temple while Sidious operated through Senate law, military command structures, and direct influence over the Order's own leadership. There was no corridor they could have patrolled, no record they could have secured, no action available to them that would have reached him, because the system they enforced so faithfully was not incomplete in the sense of having gaps that could be closed, but pointed entirely the wrong way, and the Order's faith in it had made sure no one ever noticed. The Guards watched everything that moved through the Order's internal channels with absolute reliability, and while they watched, Sidious finalized the order that would end the Jedi forever, an order they had no way to see, no way to intercept, and no way to survive. Chapter 5. The Night It Fell. When Order 66 was issued, the distance between where the Guard was looking and where the threat was coming from closed in a single night. As shown in Revenge of the Sith, the command triggered a behavioral modification built into every clone trooper in the Grand Army of the Republic before the war began. It was designed to override their training, their loyalty to their Jedi officers, and their own judgment, replacing all of it with a single directive that executed simultaneously across dozens of worlds in exactly the sequence Sidious had planned. On Coruscant, the attack on the Jedi Temple began the same night, led by Anakin Skywalker, now operating as Darth Vader, at the head of the 501st Legion. The 501st were not chosen by chance for this assignment, as they were an elite, battle-tested clone legion that had operated alongside Jedi throughout the entire war, which meant they understood how Jedi fought, how Force-sensitive opponents moved and responded under pressure, and what instincts Jedi relied on when cornered in confined spaces. They had spent years learning precisely that, fighting beside the people they were now being sent to destroy. Before the Guard could establish a response, something unprecedented occurred. The enemy was already inside the system that was supposed to stop them, not because they had bypassed the Guard, but because they had been built into the Republic itself from the very beginning. The Guard had trained for threats that came from inside, Jedi who violated protocols, members who broke rules, situations that required the Order to act against its own. Every scenario they were built to handle assumed the threat was already inside, already moving through channels they could see and intercept, which meant the 501st coming from outside the system entirely as an external military force under orders from a newly declared emperor did not move through any of those channels and left the Guard with no framework for what was happening because the Order had never conceived of needing one. What followed was not a failure of courage, because the Guards fought and held their position until they could not. It was a failure of architecture, the predictable outcome of a system built to catch every threat it had defined. Given no mechanism for confronting threats, it had not. The Darth Vader 2017 comic series covers the early Imperial period and confirms the scale of what they faced that night, a force that had spent years learning how the Jedi responded to danger from the inside. The temple fell in a single night, and those who survived were tracked down in the weeks that followed as the Empire worked to confirm that no Jedi remained operational anywhere in the galaxy. For most temple guards, that is where their record ends. Not because they abandoned their function, but because their function had no answer for what came through the door. But for one guard, the night the temple fell was not the end. It was a beginning, and what he chose to do next would make him the single most dangerous threat to every Jedi still breathing. Chapter 6: The Hunter. The ashes of the temple had not yet cooled when he made his choice. In the Rebels episode Shroud of Darkness from Season 2, Kanan faces a temple guard who is later revealed to have been the Grand Inquisitor, a connection the episode itself confirms. Before Order 66 and before the Empire, he had worn the mask, enforced the Order's rules, and operated inside the temple's most secured areas without a name the outside world could attach to him, because that anonymity was the entire point of the role he had occupied. How he survived the attack on the temple is not addressed in available canon sources. What those sources do record is the choice he made after surviving, which was not to go into hiding or continue any form of Jedi practice in secret, but to join the dark side and place himself in direct service to the Empire, becoming the leader of the Inquisitorius under Darth Vader's authority, a group of dark side operatives built specifically to hunt down and remove the Jedi who had survived the destruction of the Order. What the surviving Jedi didn't realize was that the man now hunting them had spent years inside the very place that had shaped them, and he knew every instinct they had before they acted on it. He was not hunting Jedi from the outside, working through intelligence reports and following leads the way any external investigator would. He was hunting them using a map, built from years of direct observation inside the Order that had produced them. A map that no one else in the Empire's service possessed, and that could not have been constructed any other way. He knew how Jedi were trained, which forms they had studied, and how the thinking shaped by that training expressed itself under pressure. He knew the kinds of places a Jedi on the run would instinctively move toward, what those choices would reveal about their location, and what a Jedi in hiding would trust, in ways that would ultimately expose them. Still, the more important question is not how he hunted them, but why he turned at all. And the answer reveals something deeply unsettling about the system that created him. The Temple Guard was not built to develop Jedi who thought independently about whether the Order they served was pointed correctly. It was built to develop Jedi who served completely without the kind of personal judgment that could introduce uncertainty or hesitation into the enforcement function. Guards were trained to give total loyalty to a system, not to hold personal convictions about whether that system was right. And the distinction between those two things is the difference between a servant who can redirect their loyalty and one who cannot survive losing the structure they serve. When the Order collapsed, his loyalty did not dissolve with it, but transferred, because that is what loyalty built on total service to a system does. When the system changes hands, it follows the authority, not the values behind it, because it was never trained to evaluate those values in the first place. The same commitment that had made him the Order's most reliable enforcer made him, under a different authority, its most effective destroyer, and the Order had not only failed to prevent that outcome, but had spent years carefully constructing it. The Temple Guard system worked exactly as it had been designed to work, and that is the precise nature of the problem. The Order gave the Guard access to everything worth protecting, removed every personal variable that might compromise its loyalty, and then extended a confidence in that system so complete that the question of what it cannot see was never seriously raised. Sidious did not need to breach the Guard or compromise anyone inside the temple, because he only needed the Order to trust it so completely that it stopped looking elsewhere. But what the Order didn't realize was that its confidence in the Guard hadn't just blinded it to an external threat, it had also quietly produced the most dangerous internal one. One of the Guard's most disciplined members became, after the Order's fall, the most effective hunter the surviving Jedi would face. Not because he was the strongest operative the Empire could deploy, but because the years inside the temple had given him something no outsider could replicate, a complete understanding of the people he was now pursuing, built from watching them before they ever knew they would need to run. The Order had not just failed to stop him, it had spent years building the conditions that made him possible. The Guard was never the weakness, the confidence the Order placed in it was, and that confidence was built into the system from the very beginning. The story of the Temple Guards is one piece of a much longer history. The Order they served took thousands of years to build, and that story goes all the way back to where the Jedi began, what they originally believed, and how they grew into the institution that eventually fell. And what happened to the Guards during Order 66 was not the first time the Jedi came close to being wiped out. That has happened more than once, and each time it left a mark on everything that came after. Both stories are available on our channel.